I hate this idea that you can't change, you can't evolve, you can't explore. I think that's the beauty of being queer. I like to try and blame intelligently, and actually without those experiences, I don't think I would be who I am now, and I love who I am. Actually, at the grand old age of 35, I think I can finally say, I don't want to wear that mask, and that's actually not who I am. I think we are so lucky to be queer in any part of that spectrum. I think we are more open. I think we're more loving. I think we're more understanding. I think we're better humans. I just do. I have a superiority complex with being queer.
Hello and welcome back to Queer Talker. I'm your host, Ben Cicchetti, and this week I am joined by author, presenter, and content creator, your lesbian big sister, Helen Scott. But before we get to that episode, I have a familiar favor to ask. Wherever you are watching or listening to this episode, please hit that subscribe button. It's a small action, but it genuinely makes a massive difference. It's going to allow me to grow this podcast, and as I keep saying, bring you the best and the queerest episodes every single time. So in advance, thank you. Now to my episode with Helen. Helen, I have a theory that to understand an LGBTQ plus person as an adult, you first need to learn about them as a young person. So what should I know about you as a child or a teenager to understand the Helen that sits in front of me today?
Oh, it's such a loaded first question, Ben, first of all. Such a loaded question. And, I feel like don't want to trigger warning the very start of this podcast, but I do think the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me is that, today I am, an advocate for not only my community, but for everybody to live their authentic lives, loving who they are. That is just so important to me in who I am today. And I think, to be honest, that does stem from my childhood, I was bullied a lot as a kid, to be honest with you. I was a very outgoing, very confident young person, but I think even at an early age, people were very intimidated by that. And it meant that, I was always dancing as a kid. I was a professional dancer as my first career. And as a young dancer, because I was good, I got a lot of, I was really bullied at dance school and, amongst my peers at the time. And, even in school, I think being that kind of very confident, outgoing, loud person, now know that I have ADHD as well. So that was also playing a part of it. But, I then had this friendship group when I was 13. I ended up getting jumped by that group of people. And I just think it's made me such an empathetic, such an advocate to love who you are regardless. I think I champion the underdog. It's definitely had, I don't want to say a positive impact because I would rather it never have happened, but I like to try and blame intelligently, and actually without those experiences, I don't think I would be who I am now. And I love who I am. So I have to sort of, take all of those experiences, good and bad. But I think, going through those periods of, getting bullied, I think it really has made me such a caring, empathetic person now. And that's what I want for everybody to feel about, I want everybody to love themselves and to feel accepted. So yeah, probably that. Sorry if it's such a deep answer to your first question, but
No, but it is. It's those early experiences that shape us, right? The good and the bad, as you said. They really do shape us into who we are. And hopefully we, at this point, love who we are. And therefore, those experiences, even unfortunate at the time, are kind of how we got to where we are. And I think another experience that often shapes us, especially as LGBTQ plus people, is that first kind of awareness of the community. So do you remember the first LGBTQ plus person you kind of became aware of, either in real life or in the media? And what impression do you think that left on you?
I mean, definitely not in the media. I'm an 89 baby. So I grew up in the 90s.
86.
Yeah, come on, we're millennials. So there was no representation in the media. And I do think that's why it took me so long to realize that I was gay.
Yeah.
But the first LGBTQ plus person that I became aware of was one of my close friends at school called Emmy. And you might have heard a little bit about her in my book, Live, Laugh, Lesbian. She was an out and proud lesbian at school. And this is like 2004, 2005. So very rare at that time. I think gay boys were sort of more open then, I think, because it was, easier to spot in some way.
Right.
And I think boys definitely would have had it harder growing up, sort of less able to mask. I don't want to say had it harder because everybody has their own experience, but Emmy was this out, proud lesbian and we did drama together. And I remember really fancying her. And she wasn't my first kiss with a girl. I'd had some other experiences growing up, but it was my first sexual experience with another woman where I felt like I was really attracted to her. And, but because of the lack of representation, I didn't know that I was a lesbian because I was, very feminine presenting, loved dancing, loved fashion. I was, watched Sex and the City on Friday nights. I was very stereotypically a girl, what girls were meant to be in the early noughties and 90s growing up. But she was different and I really fancied her. And I kissed her outside a Chinese.
There we go.
Outside a Chinese restaurant, I know. And I just had this real strong connection to her. And luckily, I actually was able to tell my mum about it. I have queer family and my mum's very liberal, very, very no fucks given, to be honest with you. And so I was able to tell her. And because she worked at my school, she knew who Emmy was. And her response was, Emmy's very charismatic person. I can totally see why you would fancy her. I can totally see why you would want to kiss her.
Yeah.
But, as much as I really liked her, and I think if I had understood who I was then, I think she probably would have been my first girlfriend, but I didn't know. I didn't understand it. And so it was just, this kind of short-lived experience, but she was so impactful on me as a young person, and yeah, because like I say, there was no one else I knew. I didn't know another lesbian. I didn't know any other lesbians growing up. So it was like, oh, she was like this, oh, wow, this is different, this is exciting. But I definitely had that very strong, it was an awakening of sorts. It's just that my heart and my head didn't put the two together.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And I think that kind of awakening is kind of that first step. And I always think the kind of, not the final step, but one of the most important steps is that feeling of authenticity, that feeling of being able to be your authentic self. So after that kind of early experience, when do you think you first felt authentically you? And then when did you think you could bring that authenticity to everything you do today?
Well, I do think, I think I know, and I think we all have this understanding as we get older, is that there are so many versions of you. I'm not the person I was when I was 17, which is when I came out, which is when I had that real realization that I was a lesbian. But there have been so many different evolutions of myself. And so there's lots of different times throughout my life that I can look back on and think, oh, I was really stepping into my authentic self as who I was then. So I think there's lots of experiences. The first was definitely when I realized, oh my God, I'm a lesbian. And it did take me meeting my second ever lesbian, who was someone I worked with and ended up being my first girlfriend and was kind of my big realization. But that first kind of feeling of authenticity, I think, came when I went to a gay bar for the first time. And
Hey, interesting.
very different. This is 17 years ago now, my first gay bar experience. And queer nightlife was so different then. I always say, I think I had the last of the best queer nightlife that has happened in our generation. You know, there were so many places you could go. They were all mixed, you know, and I think it's great now that we have sort of more places that we can go that are catered to who we are. You know, different, you know, gay men have their nights, lesbians have our nights. There are different types of nights for different parts of all different sorts of things. You know, I love that. But back then, you had a gay bar, and that's where everyone went. You were surrounded by trans people and lesbians and gay people and twinks and bears and femme lesbians and all. It was, we were all mashed up together. And I remember going to that gay bar and just thinking, oh my God, I felt alive. I felt like something had fully clicked in me, and I was so excited. I was so excited to feel so connected to something. Um, you know, and yeah, I think I feel very lucky that I was able to really step into my sexuality and my identity, you know, without a lot of backlash and a lot of fear. You know, I'm a very palatable lesbian at the end of the day. You know, I don't necessarily look like a lesbian. I'm white, I'm blonde, you know, I've got a lot of privilege. So I think I was very lucky to have that first feeling of authenticity at that gay bar. But that sense of connection, I want that for everybody, because there is nothing better. There really isn't.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that immediate sense of belonging. So, from my own experience, having gone to a lot of, straight bars for years and years and years, and then finally, my good friend, and he was one of my first kind of gay friends, a guy called Nico. He invited me to London, and he took me to Heaven for the first time, and that kind of experience of, oh, I belong here. Like this is my world.
Yeah.
And you still get that today. I often find you get that in other experiences, like going to a drag show or going to, I saw Kylie a few weeks ago, and that, bit stereotypical, but there's a lot of gays at Kylie, and you feel like part of that community, and that sense of belonging is so very important. So I kind of completely appreciate where you're coming from there.
Yeah.
And you touched on your amazing book, which came out in 2023, called Live, Laugh, Lesbian. I recently finished listening to it on Audible, read by yourself. It was amazing. Talk to me about that book. How did it come about, and kind of what's the response been to it?
I mean, it came from the community, to be honest with you. So back in 2020, I was working on the BBC. I had a radio show on the BBC, and I think I'd really started to build an online community at this point, who I, very dearly call my famalam. And it really came from them. I was getting a lot of DMs asking me for advice on different sorts of things regarding lesbian life and sexuality and accepting yourself. And I love, I respond to every message I ever get on Instagram and on TikTok and everywhere. I always respond to everybody. But I just found that I always just had so much more to say than what I could put into a DM. And I wanted to be able to really put to bed some of these people's fears or concerns or negative feelings that they had about themselves. And I wanted to do more than just reply on a DM. I wanted to sort of have a long lasting impact and put way more into it. So it was when I was on the BBC and I was getting a lot more DMs than I ever had. And I thought, I think I want to put this in a book. I want to cover all the questions that I get asked regularly, and really give some in-depth advice to help people to love who they are and to navigate, the 21st century as a queer person. So that's where the book came from. And I think, definitely as I've gotten older, I turned 30 in 2019 and, kind of took on this kind of big sister role, and it's all of that kind of packaged into one. Just want to give people a big lesbian hug and let them know that there is a happy and fulfilled life to be lived. So yeah, that's where it was born. And then I realized that there was no lesbian advice books out there. In fact, my book was one of the first books ever to have the word lesbian in the title. That was even a struggle. My first round of pitching out to sell the book was completely ignored for the fact that it had the word lesbian in the title. Publishers thought, there's no way this book is going to sell with the word lesbian in it. And I think, you know, it's 5 years since I've had the idea, and it's 3 years since we pitched, and 2 years since the book has come out. And so much progression has happened for lesbians and the lesbian label in the last couple of years. We've had the lesbian renaissance, which is amazing. So yeah, I'm really proud of it. And I'm just really proud of anyone who has picked it up, to be honest, and or listened to it, because, you know, sometimes it takes a lot of balls to really want to accept yourself and to really take the time to love who you are. And so I think it's I think it's a wonderful thing if you've read it.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it. You know, obviously the title, Live, Laugh, Lesbian, but you know, anyone in the queer community, anyone in the LGBTQ plus community, there's so much connection to the experiences you had. There's so much similarity, I think, to the experiences that I, as a gay man, I'm sure other gay men have experienced, and bisexual people. I think it's such an important book. So everyone in the community, I kind of highly recommend, pick it up, give it a listen. I listened to it on my dog walk. It made for a great, entertaining dog walk. It's funny, it's touching. It's just a really, really, really good book. And in it, you speak about, and you spoke about it a little bit just now, the pressure to fit into certain stereotypes to be seen as a quote unquote good lesbian. How do you think we can break, you know, it's 2025 and it just feels like we need to break through those expectations? Personally, I'm someone that's often kind of assumed straight because of the way that I present. And I know, as you've said, that comes with a huge amount of privilege.
Yeah.
But it also means you're kind of forever coming out. You're forever kind of correcting people. What's been your experience of navigating that and navigating those expectations? And how can we kind of break through those stereotypes finally?
It's a tough one. I think there's so many elements to that question. I think importantly, we're seeing right now a lot of vitriol online around the Jojo Siwa and Chris Hughes relationship. And I think that relates to your question so well, because it's infuriated a lot of the lesbian and queer community that Jojo is exploring her sexuality. And, you know, let's face it, there's a lot to do with publicity and marketing and career and all of that surrounding it too. However, this is a young person who is exploring what she wants, who she is, and particularly in a very, very public way like she is. I hate this idea that you can't change, you can't evolve, you can't explore. I think that's the beauty of being queer, is that it's great that we have labels. It really is, I think, and we're getting more and more so that we can really sort of identify different parts of ourselves and different, you know, different feelings and different, you know, places that we're at in our lives. But labels, we're not beholden to them. You know, and I talked a lot about in my book as well. You know, I strongly identify with my lesbian label. If I really black and white it, I'm probably pansexual, because I would date, I would date more than just what a lesbian, you know, in black and white is, you know, a woman who fancies other women. I have dated trans people. I have dated gender fluid people. So if you want to black and white it, okay, can I call myself a lesbian? Well, I think I can, because that is what I identify as. That is the strongest identification for me. But we should not be beholden to labels. And, you know, I think I thought that we were kind of getting into a better place with it, but this Jojo Siwa thing has really thrown up a lot of, you know, not giving people the room to explore the grey areas, you know, and I think that is so important. I feel like I've forgotten your question and like the other part
No.
of it now, because I've got a tangent there, but it is not okay for anybody to feel annoyed about anybody else's choice in who they love. And isn't that what, you know, if anybody knows that the most, it's us, it's the queer community. So it really infuriates me to see all of this vitriol surrounding Jojo and Chris at the moment, because I think it's not helpful in the long run for our, you know, for us coming together, which is what I think we need more than ever right now. You know, I've talked a lot in the past about the kind of divide between lesbians and gays. You know, I think lesbians have historically really been the foundation of a lot of the change that has happened for this community over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And I don't think that lesbians get enough credit. I do think there's still this divide in the community in that sense. I thought we were getting better. And what I don't want is for things like this Jojo Siwa story to push anybody back into the closet, to make them feel like, oh, I don't want to say I'm this, because what if I change my mind, and what if I'm that? We've got to just be more accepting and more understanding, and understand that just like you change as a person in your personality and your life choices, your sexuality can be fluid as well. I don't know if that really answered your question, but
It did, and I think it is so important. I think it's one of the joys of being queer, right? It's one of the reasons I kind of love the term queer as a, you know, a phrase for the entire community, because I think it does represent, there's so many parts of who we are. And I also think, going back to kind of the stereotyping element, there's also nothing wrong with identifying with those stereotypes. There's nothing, you know, people kind of almost shun those stereotypes now. But, you know, I have fabulous, very, very camp gay friends. I have fabulous, very butch lesbian friends, and like they're amazing and they're beautiful, and that's who they are. So yes, you know, not everyone's going to fit into that stereotype, and we need to move beyond those stereotypes and recognize that, a bit like your kind of response there, there's so many different ways to be gay. There's so many different ways to be a lesbian. There's so many different ways to be queer as a whole. So the more that we can embrace that, represent that, see that represented. I also think social media plays a massive role in that level of representation, because we're kind of gone are the days where, you know, some of the first representation a lot of people saw was on kind of soap operas, where it was kind of the token lesbian or the token gay. Now we're seeing every part of the queer spectrum, if you like, kind of represented. Why is that important? And what's kind of been your experience on social media and that representation?
I mean, I first came into the social space in 2019. So not super long ago, really. But it was a very different space then. I remember when I started sort of posting on socials in a more content creator way, if you like. I was actually introduced to sort of the content creation world through an ex-girlfriend of mine who was awful, actually. It was my first experience of dating a narcissist. And but again, I like to blame, you know, intelligently. I don't think, had I dated her, I might have not gone down this path. She taught me a lot about you know, being visible online. That's a story for another day. That could be juicy to get into another time. But back then, 2019, I was really one of the first feminine lesbian women in the UK who was posting about the queer experience and being a lesbian. Whereas, you know, now there's so much more than ever, and it's just amazing to see. I think I go on social media every day and I learn something new. I find a different perspective. I, you know, find out new things all of the time. So I think you're right. It's definitely a double-edged sword, because, you know, there's just, I think people forget that there's so much more nuance to topics or situations than what one little video can sort of capture, you know. But like I say, I didn't know that I was a lesbian when I was 15 years old, and I couldn't pursue a relationship with Emmy when I was 15 because I didn't see myself anywhere. That's why I didn't know I was gay, because I'd never seen a lesbian who looked like me. I didn't know, the two could not connect because I didn't know that could be a thing. So what I love about socials is that I do think we see the entire spectrum of the community online, and I do think that can only be helpful. I just worry about, you know, the next generation. I just hope that they really do understand that there's always more to it than just what one video or one post or one caption can really say. And, you know, that really can only happen if there's community in real life, if we see each other in real life and we spend time communicating and engaging with each other in a safe space. And we have, unfortunately, lost a lot of those. You know, there are no lesbian bars really anymore. Our gay bars are becoming more divided, I feel, you know, and we're coming, like I said, getting all of these different events for different types of people, which is a good thing. but there's got to be times where we come together
Yeah.
that's not just pride, you know, where we can talk to each other and understand each other's experiences. So,
Yeah, I agree. And I think, to a few of the points you've made, we need more togetherness. I had Ollie Pike on the podcast, and he talked a lot about this. We're getting attacked from outside the community. The last thing we really need is to be attacking people and being divided inside the community. And obviously, you get some of that on social media. There are the negative sides of social media, which is very evident. I think one of the there's obviously a lot of power in social media. So I'm curious to know, when did you kind of first realize the power of that platform? But then obviously social media doesn't necessarily lend itself to authenticity, which is how we kind of started this conversation. So how do you stay authentic whilst handling the pressure of being a very visible person on social media?
I think the first time I realized the power of social media and representation was when I'd started to take content creation quite seriously. I'd been doing it for about 3 months, and my ex-girlfriend and I at the time got an email from River Island to front their Pride campaign. And I thought, wow, why, I thought, oh, wow, this has really made an impact. Like, just this short amount of time, just going on the internet and going, I'm a lesbian. I look like this. This is how I live my life. You can do whatever you want to do. You can live authentically too. You can be happy. You can whatever. And I was like, wow, that was like, and I think the fact that it was such a short time span, and it was clearly something that was missing in representation that made them come to me and my partner at the time to front that campaign. It was a sense of, this is missing in visibility. We need to put this here. And that was pretty incredible. And that made me realize, wow, I think I could make a real impact here, in helping people to identify who they are and to accept themselves. And how I stay authentic now, I think, is by really doing the work off of social media. I'm such an advocate for therapy. I have a therapist every week. I don't think you need to go every week. I just love my therapist. I had a lot to unpack. I've always got a lot to say. But I think it's by grounding yourself in your real life. I love socials because I've connected with people from all around the world in all different all different paths of life, all different ages. And I love that you get that sense of community, but you have to love the life you genuinely live. You have to connect to it and connect to yourself. And I don't think you ever stop learning about yourself. I don't think you ever stop changing. Even things like, for example, I think it's been about 8 or 9 months now where I've said to my community, this is a filter-free zone. On stories, it's so easy just to chuck a filter on and to, because you look at yourself and you go, oh God, I've got a bit back today, or I don't look so great. Fuck that. Fuck the filters. They are so harmful, and you don't realize how harmful they are until you stop using them. And now I would not dream of going on my stories and putting a filter on myself to make someone else think, oh, I don't look that nice, or I don't look that good, or whatever. So it's continuously happening, keeping finding that authenticity. But I do think it happens offline, and it just comes back to that, needing to be around each other and, coming together. And yeah, I think that's where the authenticity starts, is you've got to just do all of that work on you first. And then, how could I turn up online and be anything but myself?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I'd love to pull on a thread of something that's come up a few times now, and that is community in real life, right? There's obviously a community that happens on social media, but that's, not necessarily the same as meeting people in real life. And you are, in your book, refer to kind of as your second family.
Yeah.
But for many, that creating those connections offline is easier said than done. I think for younger generations, they seem to be less social than previous generations. We're seeing, as you said, spaces disappear. And even for those who are kind of in their 30s, there's a whole new set of challenges of trying to find a community and find a new friendship circle. For both of those kind of ends of the equation, what advice would you give to them if they are struggling to find their people and find their community?
Yeah, I think it's a real common problem. And I do think, like you say, each age group has its own, worries and concerns. Because I've got people in my DMs who have come out at 50, 55, and they're like, oh, where can I go? Well, who can I look at? I think there's still a lack of representation online for the older lesbian community. I'm 35, so, it won't be long, I'll be there. But, right now, I think we could really do with someone who's 40, 50, 60, who's coming out and showing up online and talking about all the lesbian and queer things that they're going through. However, I think ultimately it's like anything in your life. You're not going to become your healthiest self if you don't work out, or you're not going to get your master's degree unless you do the work. You're not going to find community unless you really put in the effort. And don't want to be like teaching people to suck eggs here, but you've got to put yourself out there. There are things to do, there are places to go, there are things happening. You've just gotta look in, be a bit brave, and just bloody go for it. There are so many different ways that you can, find local events, things that are happening. Bit more difficult if you live in a rural area, especially, if you've got to travel to places, you've then got to add on the financial cost of all of that as well. I'm not saying it's easy, and, definitely not saying it's easy, but I think start online, find out what's going on. And a lot of the things now that happen, there's often, a little group where if you're coming by yourself, you can, add yourself into that group and then you're all kind of meeting together. But I think it's just, I do think it's so important to put the effort in to find people that you can relate to. Now, I'm not a big friendship group person. I've got sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're my core people. They're, people that I would speak to really regularly. But even me, I moved to Manchester, a new city for me, a couple of years ago now, and I'm still working on finding my community here. I've got a couple of people. I've been invited to a house party next Saturday night. I'm going to go to that, meet some people that I've never met before. You are always, growing your community, and it's always changing. But I think it's the effort that you put in and just trying to be a little bit brave and take the leap and go out there and do it. But yeah, online, there's meet up even. Loads of things, go on, Facebook, Facebook's for the boomers, but there's a lot of events that happen on there that you can find through socials and TikTok. But yeah, I think you've got to make it a priority, and I hope that people do, because I think you're happier. There's so much happiness to discover when you meet people who look, feel, can relate to who you are.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely with that advice. It takes courage. It takes an effort. You have to consciously make the decision to put yourself out there.
Yes.
But the benefit of doing so, not just living quote unquote online, but actually living offline is really, really important.
Yes.
And we started this conversation talking about your younger self. So let's revisit them. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? And would it be different if I said, what advice would you give to a young queer person today?
I think the advice that I would give to my younger self now, and I think, this is, again, this is therapy that has just taught me so much about myself, and it's not easily accessible therapy by any means. But again, I think I always encourage people, if you can, then do. I'm a very confident, very loud, very, I think people would look at me and think, oh God, she must have no problems. She's so confident. She's so out there. But I think I would say to my younger self that it's okay to be sensitive and, to be a little bit broken, because really underneath it all, I'm just a sensitive girl, just like everyone else. I've got my own worries and my own insecurities. And, I think for a long time, I felt like I had to put on a front and be strong and not show vulnerability, and I'm okay and everything's great. But actually, at the grand old age of 35, I think I can finally say, I don't want to wear that mask. And that's actually not who I am, I am a little bit sensitive and a little bit, second guess myself sometimes, and that's okay. And I think that does stem from childhood. And I think that's what I would say, and just give myself, a big hug and go, it's all right,
Yeah.
right to feel like that. And it's all right to have a bit of a cry and that kind of thing. I think LGBT wise, if I was speaking to a young LGBT person, I think it would be to let them know that I really think we are the luckiest people on the planet. I think we are so lucky to be queer in any part of that spectrum. I think we are more open. I think we're more loving. I think we're more understanding. I think we're more interesting. I think we lead more exciting lives. I think we're better humans. I just do. I have a superiority complex with being queer. I
I
do.
love that.
I think God, it ain't easy. There's no doubt about it. And I know that I speak from a place of privilege. However, inside ourselves, fuck what everybody else says and fuck how people treat you. But on the inside, I think we're so lucky to think how we do and to be how we are. And that, in every way possible, I would like to help them understand that and get to that space. But also, there are so many other humans who are out there with their advice and their experiences, wanting to help all of everybody get there too. But yeah, I would want to say we're really fucking lucky. I always say, thank God I'm not straight. I'm such a boring person. White, blonde, and straight. Boring. I would be so boring. I'm so glad to be gay.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's so much joy in being queer, and I think that's great advice for people. Despite, some of the headlines you might see, some of the stuff you might see online, actually, there's so much joy in being queer. And when you can get to that level and that stage, you will feel such a sense of fulfillment. We will end with our rapid fire questions, which I love. And we're going to start with, in the community, we love a good queer icon or a good icon, especially powerhouse women. Think Gaga and Whitney and Britney and Cher. Who's your ultimate go-to queen?
Okay, so my go-to queen is Bette Midler.
Love that.
Old school, very old
Mm,
school, but she is the OG queer icon. She
yeah.
started out her career performing in the gay saunas in New York and, getting her music written by Barry Manilow. Like, she's so camp. And I think she's just utterly iconic. She has always been who she is, no fucks given. And yeah, I just rate her. I think she's the OG queer icon.
Love that. We touched on the lack of representation earlier on in media, but today, what is your favorite queer TV show or movie?
Oh, I mean, I have to just give props to the L Word because it did bits. It really did things. But my favorite queer TV show, I think right now, would be Deadlock. It's called Deadlock,
Mm,
and it's
haven't seen it.
really, really good. It's like a black comedy, and it's about it's like a detective-y murder set in New Zealand or Australia. That's terrible. Sorry to my New Zealanders and Australias. I think it's Australian. It is queer. The first episode starts with two women having sex, and it is just brilliant. It is very underrated. Everybody must watch it. However you identify, it is brilliant.
Love that. I'm going to definitely look it up. I love this podcast because I get so many good recommendations. Zach Haniff was the person that introduced me to Hacks because I'd never seen Hacks. So, yeah, I love being able to ask people.
Yeah.
What is one book other than your own that every LGBTQ plus person should have on their shelf or in their Audible account?
Okay. There are many. There are many. But I think right now in particular, I'm going to say too, Charlie Craggs, To My Trans Sisters. Right now we need to be doing everything we can for the trans community. So buy her book. She's doing amazing things. And also Kenny Ethan Jones has recently brought out a book about his trans experience too. So I would say both of them. Get both of them. Kenny Ethan Jones is
Brilliant.
in Charlie Craggs' book.
Brilliant. I will be picking both of those up straight after this episode. If you had to lip sync for your life, what song would you choose?
My God, lip sync for my life to any song. I know this is like random as hell, but Let It Go from Frozen.
Amazing.
Yeah. I think
It's brilliant.
by Dina Menzel by
Mm,
it's dramatic. And I think it's
yeah,
also kind of, let it go. It's very me coded, but yeah, I
I
think you
love that.
play that. I just
It's a
want like
great
a
choice.
snow machine and fans, make it really camp.
I can really see it. I can really see it. And we have a playlist on Spotify that'll get added to. So people can now, that'll feel like a slightly out there choice compared to the others. But I love it. I think it's such a good addition to it.
Thank you.
So obviously, author, radio DJ, host, stand-up comedian, you kind of do everything. But if you could only do one of those things for the rest of your career, which would you have to choose?
Oh my God,
Feels like Sophie's choice. I'm sorry.
you can't ask an ADHD person that. Like, why do you think I do all these different jobs? It's because I can't just do one. I think probably to write. I think if I had to choose one, I think, yeah, I'm working on the second book right now, which is due out early 2027. So
Amazing.
yeah, I think that, would be the most helpful thing. And ultimately, that is just what I want to do to the core of me. I just want to help people to love themselves. And I think that writing would probably have the longest lasting impact. So that.
Yeah, and I think there's something beautiful about a book in that it will live on a shelf forever, theoretically, whether it's a digital shelf or whether it's a physical shelf as we go forward. And so kind of that lasting legacy and that lasting impact that you can have, I think is amazing.
I live for the day. I want to be in a charity shop and see my book on the shelf in the
Okay.
charity shop. Do you know what I mean? Like someone
Yeah.
read it, passed it on. I can't wait for the day to see it in a charity shop. And yeah, and I'm going to write a little note in it. But anyway, yeah.
And if you spot it, take a photo, put it on social media. We need to see it. That'd be amazing. If you could have one drink with any queer person, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Okay. A drink with a queer person, dead or alive. I mean, I think it's got to be Marsha P, hasn't it? I think it would have to be Marsha P. Kind of, I know that's like a bit of an obvious choice, maybe. But yeah, I would just love to hear her experience. Actually, there's a book called Marsha that has just been released, and I forget the lovely person's name who's written it, but it is the story of Marsha P.
Mm,
As close to what her story is as possible.
yeah.
That's another great book to pick up, I think. I've ordered my copy. But yeah, I think I would it would be lovely to know, I'd love to look back and see what has changed for us. What can we do? I think ultimately, what should we be doing? I would love her
Yeah.
advice because we kind of come full circle a little bit with things. So I would love to know from her perspective, what does she think we should be doing now? What can we do more of and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think her.
I think it's a great choice. She's actually my choice as well when I've answered this question. I think to talk about life pre-Stonewall, to talk about the Stonewall event and the Stonewall uprising would be obviously fascinating. And then obviously to talk about life post-Stonewall. There's an amazing documentary on Netflix called, I believe it's called The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. I highly recommend it. People should check it out. It's an amazing story, an incredibly inspiring story. Final question. Who in your network would you like to hear on this podcast? And what one question would you want me to ask them?
I think a great person for you to speak to would be Lucy London. Now, Lucy London and her wife Stella are the lesbian couple who they're in my book. So you might know who I'm talking about, but they are the lesbian couple who worked with the UK government to legalise equal marriage in the UK. They are an incredible couple. Nobody knows their bloody name, which I think is crazy. The queers
Yeah.
should be thanking them on bended knee, frankly. But I think having her on, she is just incredible. She is I don't want to say an elder because she's not old in any way, but she's just so wise and she's such an advocate for loving yourself and loving who you are. And I would like to know what she thinks the queer community could do to be coming together and fighting this next big fight that we've got on our hands, because we're due a big fight right now. And I'd love to know what she thinks we should be doing as a community to prepare ourselves and to fucking overcome it, really. So yeah, Lucy London would be brilliant.
I love that. We will definitely reach out and we'll try and get her on the podcast. Helen, thank you so much for being on Queer Talker with me. But more importantly, thank you for your incredible work. Like, I so enjoyed your book. I'm super excited that there is a second one coming. I enjoy all the content you put out on social media. I just think that sort of representation and that sort of approach is so important. So from me and the entire queer community, I just want to say thank you for all that you do.
You're a dream. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun. It's like my favorite thing to do, talk, and especially talk about queer stuff. So thank you.
Queer Talker walks